This week on Quality Digest Live, a politician and a quality professional walk into a bar.
Plus another story about wine. That and more when we come back.
This week's sponsor of Quality Digest Live is TÜV Süd America. Got e-waste? Click below to access TÜV Süd America's free webinar, Responsible Recycling. It's not just for recyclers anymore.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for November 7th, 2012. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
And I'm Jeff Dewar, CEO of Quality Digest, sitting in for Mike Richman, who is out in Houston after delivering the keynote to the ASQ meeting last night, and he'll be joining us later in the show via Skype.
And actually, I heard he wrote back and said that that meeting went really well.
He did.
That's awesome. And I understand you have an interesting story today, all about one of your favorite topics, visual workplace, right?
Yes. We were very involved in what Gwendolyn and Gasworth was doing a couple of years ago, and part of an extension of that is an article that Mark Hamill wrote, a short piece for us, and we're treating it this week as a news story, entitled Visuals and a Bit of Drama. Now, it's about andon, something we covered a couple of weeks ago in our weekly Qualipedia column. And here's a short definition, paraphrased a bit from Mark's article and Wikipedia. Andon is a Japanese expression. It's a manufacturing term referring to a system to notify management, maintenance, and other workers of a quality or process problem. The centerpiece is a signboard incorporating signal lights to indicate which workstation has the problem. The alert can be activated manually by a worker using a pull cord or a button, or may be activated automatically by the production equipment itself. Some modern alert systems include audio alarms, text, or other displays. So here's a typical example. You've got a status board, and it can tell you if a problem is happening or is about to happen. And it's really a core part of the famous Toyota production system, which includes these devices to give the worker the ability, and I think most importantly, the empowerment to stop production when a defect is found and immediately call for assistance. And I actually saw this in 1980 when I was on a study tour in Japan at a Honda plant. And when we were there, we were talking about what was going on. One of the workers had stopped the production line, and in 1980, to an American manager hearing that a worker, it was unfathomable.
Yeah.
It was something we couldn't even conceive. Now, there are obviously many various types of these visuals and visual management systems. They can be quite simple, as your dashboard in your automobile, or very detailed and quite complex. However, in all cases, their job is to be self-explaining, typically worker managed, not manager managed, self-correcting things that would inform employees of what's going on, align their activities correctly, highlight any abnormal conditions, prompt lean management behaviors, and of course immediately spur some problem solving. Sure. And the author points out that it's not often that someone comes up with a visual that one could characterize as dramatic, fun, or entertaining.
But we have one.
But Mark says there's no rules against that he's aware of. And he uses this great example of a truck. On the left is the pass side, on the right is suicide.
Yeah, and I remember seeing one of those, actually. It's been a while, but I do remember seeing those on the road.
And did it catch your eye?
It definitely catches your eye, more so even than the little icon that shows, the truck turning right and a car hitting it. I mean, that's kind of the standard safety icon. But I've seen that passing side, suicide, and it draws your eyes right to it, and you immediately understand what the situation is.
And I think part of it, because it's different. It's not just that it's humorous, in sort of a twisted way, but it's also just different than what we normally see. So there's a differentiation value there.
Sure.
And if that entertainment value helps to get the message across, it's done its job.
That's right. Okay, so sure, you'll let a robot vacuum your carpet. But what about other more personal chores? Well, in a study by Georgia Tech, funded by the National Institutes for Health and the National Science Foundation, researchers looked at older adults' comfort level with robotic assistance. So here's the deal. Robots have the potential to help older adults with daily activities that can become more difficult with age. And if you have been around maybe aging parents or aging grandparents, you know what we're talking about here. But the question is, are people, older adults, willing to use and accept the new technology? Georgia Tech researchers say yes, unless the tasks involve personal care or social activity. So here's the experiment that they did. They showed adults ages 65 to 93 years old a video of a robot's capabilities. Then researchers interviewed them about their willingness for assistance with 48 common household tasks. So participants generally preferred robotic help over human help for chores such as cleaning the kitchen, doing laundry, and taking out the trash. Things that typically I do. Yeah, no, my wife would be disagreeing if she was watching this. She would be saying we need a robot. But when it comes to help getting dressed, eating, and bathing, the adults yes, the adults tended to say they would prefer human assistance over robotic assistance. Yes, eating and bathing. Yes, I don't want a robot poking something sharp into my food and bringing it up to my face. And I don't want them pulling the plug in the bathtub.
And there's a certain intimacy there that even you don't want your machine to have.
Especially pulling the plug in the bathtub. I'll do that myself, thank you. The adults tended to say that they would prefer human assistance over robotic assistance also for social activities, such as calling family and friends or for entertaining guests. And the other thing that was interesting is the preferences across particular types of tasks, such as, let's say, medication. Adults said they are willing to use a robot for reminders to take medicine, but they are more comfortable if a person helps them decide which medication to take. So we're going to see more of this. Again, this is a technology that is getting more and more available at less and less cost. We made the joke about a Roomba, that's the robotic thing that vacuums your floors. But I mean, they've got robots that are now walking unassisted, right. Full visual capabilities and so forth. And you're going to see robotic. It may not necessarily be a robotic-looking person. It may simply be a robotic arm or something. But basically, robotics helping you to do various tasks. So.
Well, they're talking already about a robotic arm that would be just the arm emptying your dishwasher. Right. And this sounds to me, Dirk, very much like the classic tension or stress between the high-tech versus high-touch world.
High-tech versus high-touch, yeah, exactly. I love that term because that's really what it comes down to. And by the way, we're seeing it shift more towards. Actually, researchers did mention that the results did kind of surprise them. They thought there would be more resistance from older people on robotics than there was. And basically, it broke down to, like you said, the high-tech versus high-touch kind of dilemma.
And my mother, she's in her 80s, and if I would have shown her, and it just goes to show you just a decade of development, less than a decade of the Roomba product. I actually bought that first Roomba product, and there is no way that my mother would have accepted it, would have had any faith in it, because it was, quite frankly, an ineffective product. Right. You compare it to its, I think, 5th generation now successors, that is a totally different animal. It looks more like a mini tank than the toy that it used to look at, and is quite effective.
Cats love Roombas.
Right.
Okay. Another popular article that we had this week, right on Election Day, was an article written by Miriam Boudreaux, and it compared, not favorably, politicians to the quality professional, and kind of gave the attributes of kind of the preeminent politician versus what you might compare to, let's say, a good quality professional. There were quite a few interesting differences on that. Like I said, mostly with the politician ending up in the minus column. No big surprise there. But to talk about a little bit about her article is Miriam Boudreaux. And Miriam is coming to us from Houston, Texas, along with our publisher, Mike Richman, who just happens to be down in Houston delivering his ASQ address, which we mentioned earlier. Hi, guys. How you doing?
Hi. How are you?
So Miriam, I don't know if we told you this, but that article actually was one of the more popular articles this week. It got read quite a bit. I think there was quite a bit of humor that people could relate to when you compare a politician to a good quality professional. So, Mike, I believe you had a few questions you wanted to ask Miriam there on the show while you're down there.
I did. Thanks, guys. And Miriam, great article, as Dirk said. It was extremely well read, got a lot of good comments. So I was curious, what prompted you to begin thinking about politicians and quality professionals and wanting to compare them in an article like this?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. And actually, the article wasn't really just written in one day. It was a compilation of several events. And basically, it's just the fact that a lot of our politicians are just doing a lot of things that put them in the spotlight, in the limelight, and not for the right reasons. And that's what got them in the A- column or in the B- column. But a lot has to do with accountability. And it's just the fact that they are out there doing wrong things, getting caught, and yet nobody holds them accountable. Mm-hmm. And in contrast, in the quality profession, you are accountable for not just the quality of the product, but you gotta make sure that the people are competent. There's just so many things that we are held accountable for that, to me, that was a very, very a lot of contrast with what our politicians are doing out there.
Well, I think also a thing that came to my mind once you brought it up is that I think, again, contrasting politicians to, let's say, a quality professional, the quality professional is looking to get to the root cause of the problem, whereas I think very often politicians, and I think, if I can just editorialize a little bit, after all, a lot of this is I think the electorate is to blame. We expect instant results, and usually you don't get instant results if you have to do a root cause analysis. And I think very often politicians are put into the position of there's a problem, I've got to announce a solution for it before I even really know what the problem is, because if I don't start saying something, the electorate is going to be upset with that. I mean, what do you think about that?
Actually, that's a great point. You're correct. And we've heard not just once, but many times where several of these solutions that have been proposed have not even been read by many of the people who are supporting them. And we're talking about thousands of pages who are read by some intern out there who's not really familiar with the problem, or I really don't have the knowledge or expertise or background to even know about that. So yeah, that is a great point. In quality, we will never go to a solution without really digging down so that we can prevent things from reoccurring. And we don't see that a lot, and that's why we're never getting out of several holes that we are in, which are, I don't want to mention it, but I guess there's a lot of things going wrong in this country.
Well, I think, what I thought, Dirk, when you mentioned that, is I thought that, quality professionals' task is to uncover root causes of problems, and I think politicians often are the root causes of problems. I think that's probably part of what's going on here. Well, so Miriam, talk about some of these things that you looked at, some of the alignment issues. Think about being born successful or achieving success.
I know. Well, some of these politicians, when you read their track record, when you get to learn where they came from, you're like, gosh, I would never, based on our competency requirements, I would never go and hire somebody like them for my business, right, without any kind of successful history, without any kind of experience. And so that was part of the born successful. But there were another things that they just like to be have all these perks too, that we know how many their perks they have. We have benefits, but they have their own separate benefits, right? And their gym, which this guy was, when he took pictures of himself, there I was like, oh my God, and you know who I'm talking about, right? Or when the other guy went out to Argentina, I was like, what was he thinking? You could never do that at work. You'll be fired in no time, right? But one of the phrases that I thought it was good when I was putting this together, it was like, quality, if there is something good, they're never called out, it's never their thing, but if there's something going wrong, they're always called and they have something to do with it. And, quality professional will stand to the task.
Now, Miriam, let me ask you this. Could you see writing a follow-on article? I think you had about a dozen attributes where you compared on one column, here's how the politician, maybe in their typical or maybe not so favorable behavior, would react to a situation, then versus its counterpart, here's how a quality professional would react. Can you see doing the same thing and instead substituting for politician an artist, and comparing the artist to the quality professional, comparing a teacher to the quality professional, comparing any number of other professions. How would that sit, do you think?
Yeah, that's probably a good thought, actually, maybe good follow-up. Definitely try to see what are the goods and the bads. And all those professions that you mentioned, I believe they have their own good attributes, you know. I don't think you're going to find that kind of contrast as with the politicians. I hate to say that, you know, it's not that I have anything against them, but I think it would be a good idea to see maybe what other traits some of these other professions could gain from thinking a little bit more through a quality mindset.
Well, like, for example, I can see it maybe not necessarily being, you know, the politician bad, quality engineer good, but compare the quality engineer to the artist who has maybe a more developed capability of thinking out of the box, and what can the quality engineer learn by me really adapting more of an artistic sensibility career-wise for their engineering duties.
Yeah, actually, that could be, because sometimes we get boxed in ourselves, and we're thinking, you know, we're thinking in process approach, methodically, which is great, but sometimes we might think too much of it. So maybe we could learn from other professionals. Yeah, that actually, good point. Maybe we can give it a thought.
Okay. Out of the box thinking, it's always good.
Okay, guys, we're gonna have to go now. But hey, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing that article with us, Miriam. I know that you'd actually been thinking about that topic for quite a while, and it was entertaining. It is interesting to see what kind of skills or lack of skills different groups bring to the marketplace, and how we treat different things differently. In this case, between, let's say, politicians and the actual workforce. And it's always fun to beat up on politicians, and it's after election time now anyway, so what the heck. Okay, guys, thanks for joining us, and Miriam, we'll be looking forward to seeing more articles from you.
Thank you.
Okay, see you guys.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was fun.
Okay, so let's talk
Grapes.
about grapes. Let's talk about grapes.
That's
now,
great.
about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had a great article that you and Mike covered. This is a story about Ridge Road Estates Winery. Now, they're located in southern Ontario in Canada.
Great wine growing region.
Yes, and an increasingly competitive market, 350 small producers, a lot of now international competition from France, Italy, Australia, the United States. So tough business. These guys started their business in 2009.
Oof.
How would you like to start a business in a highly competitive market in that year? This article was submitted by Stuart Anderson, one of our frequent contributors, and it's entitled Case Study Growing Through Differentiation. Now, the wine industry in most countries is populated by a lot of producers, all selling wine, but differentiated in various ways. But before we get to the quality connection, really short Economics 101.
Okay.
All right, now economists talk about 4 major market structures: monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic competition, that's a oxymoron, does it not sound like?
Right.
And perfect competition. So a monopoly would typically be your power company. Yes, there's solar panels you can get and some other green technologies that are starting to emerge that might be affordable for the average family, but by and large we tend to think of the power company. If they raise the prices, we'd still have to buy the energy that they deliver. The oligopoly would be a small number of providers that are very aware of what each other is doing. Typically, that market is characterized by very high very high barriers to entry. And Sprint, AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile, that hold now in the United States 90% of the cellular phone market, are in essence, most economists would agree, an oligopoly. Monopolistic competition is, well, the wine industry, where you have a bunch of providers out there, thousands in the United States for that matter. And although because of brand loyalties and because of the very unique mixes and blends that each of these providers make, some have a great deal of latitude with how much they're going to charge. So hence they have a competitive environment, but they also have what some would characterize as a mini monopoly within their little market niche. And then perfect competition, of course they say doesn't really exist, but you can approximate it by examples of silver and gold bullion. It's the same quality, same uniques, everybody sells it, same price everywhere.
Right.
So Quality Digest sells advertising. And we are, I think, in a monopolistic competitive environment because we have a great deal of loyal advertisers. They have stayed with us. They like the audience that we're reaching, and we have a good deal of latitude with how much we're going to charge for our advertising. But there are limits to that.
Right.
We are not in monopoly. There are other places that one could go to reach similar kinds of people that we reach. Okay, so back to Ridge Road Estates Winery. With a production target of just about 5,000 cases in a very crowded market, they knew that their path to success was through differentiation.
Sure.
Anderson describes that in economic terms, a differentiation is critical to firms in a monopolistically competitive industry because it's the only way they can acquire some market power or what some say is control over their own destiny of what they're able to charge above and beyond their marginal cost to produce it.
Okay.
So when we look at the owners, one of the co-owners, Sean Douglas, he says it very eloquently. He said, we actually did not take a traditional approach of listen to our customers.
Okay.
He said, rather we took the approach of producing what we knew would grow well for us and produce something that we knew would be received well. And this, to me, was a very much more gentle and tactful way of saying what Steve Jobs said. Customers don't know what they want until we show it to them.
Until we show it to them, right, exactly.
And the movie Kevin Costner was in Field of Dreams really also was reflecting Douglas's comment that if you build it, they will come. And they decided what it is that they could build and build well, and the result starts to speak for themselves. So they started to build up this clientele. They realized that the experience at the winery was critical to cementing that relationship, and that is at the core of their quality strategy. So the tasting room, for example, offers a very unique experience that is different than the typical line them up at the tasting bar. Each group gets its own bistro table to sit at, and the group receives a custom wine experience with every visit. They even differentiate further by having a little fun with the names of their wines. They have a Cabernet called Call Me a Cab. All right. I got a little double entendre there, I suppose you could say. And with special occasions at the winery, really not so special, it's really a regular event. It's no surprise that 80% of their sales come from sales actually at the winery.
That's quite a bit.
Yes, and now there's a further connection to quality through the supply chain. They realized that they needed to look further back in their vendor relationships for the ability to be flexible and to offer unique products and services with the quality and features that they were looking for. So they put a premium on not price, but on that flexibility as they were a young winery, and with those providers and suppliers that would work with them in ways that were unique just to their winery in terms of bottling, in terms of labels, in terms of other supplies. Okay. So their loyalties will bend towards those who will accommodate them and grow with them. Now, the author goes on to explain the trick is to build these differences that are valuable to customers, which give a winery some market power and in effect allow it to decommodify itself. And in his closing line, he sums up with this quote, if you're doing what everyone else is doing, you can't make any money at it. And I remember hearing about differentiation from Tom Peters ages ago when he wrote, oh my goodness, now it just popped out of my head, but the Thriving on Chaos. Okay. And he spoke about the key to differentiation is not just finding one big thing to differentiate yourself, but finding 1,000 little ways to differentiate yourself.
Okay. Yeah, interesting article from Stuart Anderson. And it really points out differentiation takes a lot of forms. Sometimes it's product attributes, sometimes it's quality. And I think this article actually kind of pointed out kind of a different aspect of differentiation that we don't think about very often. So
certainly with an economic frame.
Yeah, including the supply chain. So another very good article this week was by Timothy Bednarz, one of my favorite authors, actually. And it was called Critical Thinking Companies Look and Operate Differently. In this article, Bednarz describes what critical thinking is and why it is important for companies to encourage and even teach critical thinking. And it's important because critical thinking is needed for problem solving and generating innovative ideas and solutions. So when organizations lack creative thinkers, says Bednarz, you tend to think with kind of the following ideas, kind of the following mental constructs kind of come to mind for companies who don't employ critical thinking. And you end up with employees who blindly repeat the destructive or negative reactions they have learned, for instance. They don't question existing workplace norms and boundaries. They robotically trust internal organization goals and plans and initiatives. And they routinely accept what the higher-ups say. If they say it, then it must be so. And so that's kind of a very robotic and slavish following of just what the crowd is doing. And you lack critical thinking, and you lack innovation, and nobody kind of questions the norms. And if that sounds like your business, then Bednarz says you are quashing innovation. Innovation requires critical thinking. And he kind of outlines some attributes of a critical thinking. And there's kind of 4 areas he points out. One of these is, and we'll put a slide up here, we've got contextual sensitivity, perspective thinking, a tolerance for ambiguity, and an alertness to premature ultimatums. I want to just touch on these really quick. When we talk about contextual sensitivity, this isn't employees who are just sensitive to, let's say, sexual stereotypes or socioeconomic stereotypes or racial stereotypes. That's typically what we think about when we talk about stereotypes, right? But in the business place, there's a lot of other stereotypes. How about the stereotype that the guy working in the warehouse is just a forklift jockey? And he couldn't possibly understand the intricacies of, let's say, running a business. Or on the flip side, that the CEO of the company is just some fat cat who's only out to make money on the back of the worker, regardless of how his decisions impact those employees and workers. That's also a stereotype. And he says, look, you've got to accept people, you've got to look at people at face value. Don't go by stereotypes, whatever that stereotype is based on. You've got to take people at face value, and it's only through that you can start to have critical thinking come into play. And part of that is this next step, which is perspective thinking. This is one of my favorites. This is where you try to get into the heads and minds of others so as to see the world the way that person does. One of my pet peeves when discussing a topic with a person is when they are unwilling to understand the perspective from which the other person is operating. You don't have to agree with it. You have to understand it. You cannot have a meaningful conversation with somebody, particularly a persuasive conversation. If you're trying to get somebody to come around, let's say, to your way of thinking, it'll never happen unless you understand the perspective of where they're coming from. Why is their worldview? Why is their view of the workplace? Why is their personal view, whether it's a view of themselves or of others? Where is that coming from?
It's like their perspective determines their perception.
And if you can't alter their perspective, then you're not going to change their decisions. So you have to understand their perspective, work on their perspective when you're trying to talk to somebody. That's how you get decisions done. That's how you get kind of the groundwork for understanding.
Is that one of those segues where you're talking to somebody and you say, well, let me explain where I'm coming from?
Exactly. And so not only let me explain where I'm coming from,
but tell me
where are you coming from? Why do you believe that way? Another thing that Bednarz points out is number 3, the tolerance for ambiguity. Employees here have to demonstrate the ability to accept multiple interpretations of the same situation. And finally, an alertness to premature ultimatums. Employees who are able to do that are employees who are able and willing to invoke a powerful idea or concept that inspires further debate and assessment. I would add, you have to be willing to play the devil's advocate, if for no other reason than to make a discussion go deeper. Even if you seem to have consensus on data or an idea, you need to shake it up so that you aren't premature in your decision making. So finally, although Bednarz doesn't really elaborate on it much, he talks about deductive versus inductive thinking. And if the 4 attributes before, let's say, were more social attributes of critical thinking, kind of the result of critical thinking, or what you need before you can have critical thinking, the actual meat of critical thinking is how you process data. And most of us either tend toward deductive or inductive reasoning. Not many people are good at both. So let's take a look at some of the characteristics of both. Deductive reasoning simply involves starting out with a theory or a general statement and moving toward a specific conclusion. Inductive reasoning takes a series of specific observations and then tries to expand them into a more general theory. And if I was to give, let's say, an example from the workplace, you might have let's say a problem in your process on the shop floor. And in order to get to the root cause of that, you're going to use inductive reasoning. So what that would be, let's say you get your team together. And one teammate has collected a bunch of data from the shop floor, which kind of shows what the symptoms of the problem are. And from all those symptoms, they might develop, let's say, an idea of what the root cause is. And maybe you have another person on the team who has been a machine operator for 30 years. That person might go from experience, from gut feeling. That person is going to say, well, based on my experience, here is where the problem is coming from. So you take all these observations and experience and you derive a premise that might be what the root cause of the problem is. That's inductive. Deductive is probably most likely the next step. Now that you have all these data, you come up with a premise. And the premise might be, if you have a machine that hasn't been maintained in 6 months, it's a machine that is operated 24 hours a day and it's stamping this particular type of problem, that machine will fail within a year. That's deductive thinking, right? And you need people whose strengths are in both to be on your team. So good article from Bednarz once again. I love the way this guy thinks. He's always getting in kind of to the psychological and the philosophical underpinnings of how we operate in the workplace. And that's kind of heady stuff. Not everybody gets into it, but I kind of really I think it's important to know how the mind works, not only your own mind, but the mind of the people that you work with.
Well, I like how he categorizes it out. It presents these, sort of principles, and even something as simple, well, not so simple, but the inductive versus deductive reasoning, as Deming would say, respect for knowledge. Right. That I can see great value in having employees understand what the difference is, being able to be fluent about the definitions and understand examples like you gave. Because when they are brainstorming and doing problem solving, they will invoke that knowledge, probably just by happenstance. But because they have it, they're able then to define the issues and the causes and so on much more precisely.
Absolutely. Okay, that's the end of our show for this week.
Well, Dirk, thank you. Mike, we miss you here. It's great to keep your seat warm. We'd like to thank today's sponsor, TÜV Südamerika. Learn more about the benefits of FSC COC certification and how your company can contribute to responsible, sustainable foresting practices. Sign up for TÜV Südamerika's free webinar, Forest Stewardship Council Chain of Custody, at tuvamerica.com, or by clicking on the banner ad just below the video player or to the right.
And also we'd like to thank today's guest on our show, Miriam Boudreaux, along with Quality Digest publisher. I almost said editor-in-chief, but that's actually me. We're interchangeable. No, not really. Mike Richman was down with Miriam down in Houston today. Mike had just finished wrapping up a talk with ASQ, and thanks to Mike and Miriam both for joining us today. Thanks to all of you for joining us as well, and we hope you will come back next week and have a great weekend.
See you in a week.
Thank you.